Mine?
Yeah, let me borrow it, will
No.
you? I have to take the blame for the delay because I'm a last-minute speaker, to be honest with you. I wasn't scheduled to be here. I just happened to be in Southern California. And Paymon had some cancellations, and I told him I'd be more than happy to speak. And then we've been trying to get some material up on the board here, and that's what we're finagling with here, Dennis and my buddies here and so forth. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. Always a pleasure. Great audience, great people, good Americans. To give you a little background, I was head of the FBI in Southern California, Dallas before that, and Memphis before that. Before that, I was a chief inspector. I was in the FBI for 27 plus years. And during that period, I handled everything you can imagine, from being a supervised organized crime, White House inquiry in Washington, D.C. I was on the street for 10 years. We call them brick agents because they're pounding the bricks, right? And fabulous career, absolutely fabulous career. I couldn't believe. I'd get up in the morning and I'd be shaving and saying, they're paying me to go to work. I can't believe they're paying me to go to do this job. That's kind of a career it was. And I've always been a very loyal American, you know, apple pie, Chevrolet, and baseball, hot dog, and all that sort of thing. And I was athletic in school. I'm very competitive. And as a matter of fact, I was interviewed for the director's job in 1975 in Dallas, Texas. And I told somebody that last night. That's the first time I've ever said that publicly, by the way. And I told somebody that last night, and I said, well, that would have been different, wouldn't it, right? But, of course, they weren't going to consider me because I was considered a Hooverite. And I had probably half a dozen meetings with Mr. Hoover during the career. One of the most frequently asked questions is, was he gay? And my answer to that is, well, I had a half a dozen meetings with him, not a bad-looking guy, and he never put a move on me. So I don't know, is he gay or not? I don't think so. I don't think so. Because those pictures came out like 20 years after he died, okay? And the source of those pictures is highly questionable. So I tell you about my career. I'm not bragging. As Will Rogers says, if it's true, it ain't bragging. I tell you about my career because I am qualified. I do have credibility. I'm not a fellow pushing a grocery cart looking for a recycling center. And this really has upset the FBI and the CIA and the White House and everybody up and down the line as far as I'm concerned. I'm the highest level former government employee who's come out critical of the government. Now, how did I get into this position? Well, when I first came out of the Bureau, retired, I had over 600 people at my retirement party. I had Governor Jerry Brown, I had former Governor Pat Brown, I had actors, I had Chief of Police Darrell Gates, Sherman Block. I had I had the mayor, Tom Bradley, and had actors there. Red Buttons was there. Louis L'Amour, the famous Western writer, was a friend of mine. I used to have lunch with him on occasion. And by the way, before I go any further, how many of you have read the internet on me? Check me out on the internet. Raise your hands. Have you seen the derogatory information about me?
On MySpace.
MySpace. Yes, there's tremendous amount of disinformation about me out there. For example, I've been married 5 times. I was kicked out of the FBI for practicing satanic ceremonies in the federal building. Okay? That's just one of the techniques that's been used and directed against me because of the stance I've taken against this corruption, this evil, I call it a criminal enterprise that's active within the government. Now make no mistake about this. The answer to who is they, I forget who asked that question down there. It's they is the Illuminati. They is the satanic movement in this country today. This is a spiritual war that we're involved in. And it's satanic all the way. There's about 4 million practicing Satanists in this country today. There's 50 to 60 human sacrifices by the satanic cults in this country every day. It's covered up. The Satanists / Illuminati / the CIA are involved in the international trafficking of children. They're involved in kidnapping children. They're kidnapping kids off the street. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, that's an adjunct of the U.S. Department of Justice, on their internet says that there are 91 Americans disappear every hour. Of these, it is estimated 85 to 90% are children. What happens to the children? They're used in human sacrifice, sex slaves, body parts. They're shipped overseas. I have a report that I have prepared called The Finders, and I'm getting way off the topic. I'm supposed to be talking about terrorism. But I need to, as they say, my friend, attorney friend over here, I'm going to lay the foundation, and that's what I'm doing for now. But I have a report I have prepared called The Finders. The Finders is a CIA covert child kidnapping operation, been active since the early 1960s. This report documents that. In among my report, excuse me, is a report that I have from the Department of the Treasury, U.S. Customs. And in there, they state that the CIA child kidnapping ring, the Finders, was exposed, and who's going to investigate it? They say it's going to be an internal CIA investigation. Now, can you imagine that? I have given that report to the FBI a half a dozen times. I even have them on a tape recorder, giving it to them. I've faxed it to them. And I've told them, you people are responsible for kidnapping matters, for the international trafficking of children. You have to investigate this. I have yet to have them come interview me. And they won't. One time in Las Vegas, I lived in LA after I retired. I moved to Las Vegas, and then about a year ago last May, I had to leave Las Vegas abruptly because I was being poisoned. I'll go a little into that later. And at one time, when they had the anthrax scare, 2 FBI agents came over, knocked on my door. They didn't know who I was. And there was a lady FBI agent and a man. And the woman was very bullish. FBI. Showed her credentials to me. I said, well, come on in. And she came in, and I had my emblem, my logo, FBI logo. She looked up at that, looked around. I had pictures of me with Ronnie Reagan and Gerald Ford. I rubbed elbows with these people, by the way. And all of a sudden, she turns the interview over to this young guy, the agent, the male agent, who was nervous as a cat on a hot tin roof, and conducted the interview. It had to do with the anthrax thing. I'd had a TV show in Las Vegas, and I had Larry Wayne Harris on my show, and it was the next night that he was arrested for supposedly having anthrax. He didn't. But anyway, that was the reason for that interview. So that's the only time the FBI has come and interviewed me. And then they didn't know who I was when they did. So anyway, I guess I need to get back on the topic of terrorism. Pamon asked me to talk about terrorism, asked me to talk about 9/11. I think I need to start with the terrorist act of Waco. The government used tanks, military tanks, against the civilian population, violation of posse comitatus. We had Ruby Ridge, Horiuchi, the FBI sharpshooter, murdered the wife. And then we had, of course, the car bombing of 1993, February 26, 1993. You want to throw that up there on the screen? Yeah, number 1, the New York Times article. There it is. I don't know if you can read that or not, but there's your proof right there. This is New York Times, October 28, 1993. There is your proof that the FBI not only knew in advance of the 93 car bombing, they furnished ingredients for the bomb. They had an informant, Salam, who was working with the terrorists, and he was ordered by the terrorists to put the bomb together. He went to his FBI supervisor. He said, we're going to use a dummy bomb, aren't we? And they said, no, use a real bomb. Now, he was an informant for the FBI, of course. The terrorists didn't know it. He wore a body mic when he met with the terrorists. Unknown to the FBI, he wore a body mic when he met with the FBI, fortunately for him. This all came out during the trial. So now we have a 43-year-old former Egyptian army officer who was involved, an FBI informant. The FBI said, no, we're going to use a real bomb. I cannot understand under any circumstances why congressmen and senators aren't jumping up and down over this situation. Now to move on from there, I need to lay some more foundation. Back in the 1980s, Nancy and Bill Hamilton, Washington, D.C., developed a computer called the Promise software. It was leased by the Hamiltons to the U.S. Department of Justice for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, the Department of Justice refused to pay the Hamiltons the $10 million owed to them for leasing this. And the Hamiltons went bankrupt, went into bankruptcy, and so on and so forth. Now, I tell you this story because this computer is being used today against all of us. They can tell you when you go through a toll bridge, when you make an airplane reservation, when you make a bank deposit. This computer covers virtually everything that we do. Telephone taps, the whole 9 yards. Now, during the 2-year period that the Department of Justice had this computer, a fellow named Michael Riconosciuto put a trap door in it. For those of you who want to make a note of this, write down his name, Michael Riconosciuto, 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 and check that out on the check him out on the internet. Michael put a trap door in it. At the end of the 2 years, the Department of Justice refused to pay, and they went bankrupt, as I said. And then they kept the Department of Justice kept the computer. No, that's not. That's too soon. That's Oklahoma City. Take that off, will you? Okay. And so during that period, Michael had put the trap door in there. And then afterwards, a fellow named Earl Bryant, a big buddy of Ronnie Reagan's, took this computer and sold it around the world. Sold it to the Canadians, the Israelis, the French, the English, and so forth. These other countries didn't know that we had a trap door and that we were illegally, unethically retrieving their intelligence information. This came out in public. Michael was asked by the Brooks Committee, they were having a committee hearing on this, if he would testify and that he put the trap door in. He received a phone call a couple of weeks before by a fellow named Peter Vietnix, according to Michael, and Vietnix told Michael, if you testify, you'll be sorry. And Michael testified, and he went. Shortly thereafter, within 6 weeks, he was arrested for drugs. First offense, tried, guilty, and sentenced to 30 years. Okay, I tell you that because before Michael went to prison, he's in prison today, he's got about 11 more years to serve. Before Michael went to prison, I had a call from a fellow named William Sloan. Bill was a former top administrator for HUD in the Reagan administration. And Bill said to me, Ted, can you help the Afghan rebels? I said, well, I don't know. But I arranged for a meeting. Knowing Michael's background, he's a scientist for the CIA for 20 years. He was recruited out of junior high school up in Washington State, by the way. Brilliant, brilliant man. And so I arranged for a meeting with Michael and a fellow from Washington, D.C. At the Hilton Hotel in Sherman Oaks. And the three of us met there, and the fellow from Washington, D.C. brought a man named Tim Osmond. Tim Osmond. He was traveling under Turkish passport. And as an outgrowth of that meeting, Michael, who's, as I say, scientist, we were able to furnish the surface-to-air missiles to the Afghan rebels. They were taken over to Afghanistan, of course, the missiles, and that were shooting down the Russian helicopters, and basically probably won the war for the Afghan rebels, defeated the Soviets. But because of Michael's contacts in the Arab world, and because, by the way, this Tim Osmond, he and Michael toured various bases around the United States, 5 of them to be exact, and Michael actually was the person that actually put the package together. After that meeting, I had nothing more to do with it. I'm not a technician. I'm lucky if I can put an extension cord into a wall socket. So Michael developed a number of sources there in the Arab world. And in the meantime, of course, even though he's gone to jail, he had access to the computer at Coleman, Florida. And they have a grapevine. I call it a grapevine. It's a network of people in the prison system. And they get the word around, believe me, they get the word around. But because of Michael's contacts with the Arab world during this period, furnishing the Afghan rebels with surface-to-air missiles, he developed a number of sources on the inside, as I said. And how are we doing over there on the camera?
What you need?
Well, let's run this. You know, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Go forward, fast forward to my terrorism report. And then we'll come back to Oklahoma City.
Tell you what, this will be faster.
Just let
You
me.
hand them to me. You know your stuff.
Okay. So I'll come back to Oklahoma City because that's very important. That's part of the terrorist movement. So Michael is in prison. I'm doing everything I can as a member of his defense team to contact him on a regular basis. And the Bureau of Prisons refused to allow me to see Michael from about the year 2000 up until 2003. They would not let me go see him. I even traveled to Pennsylvania to see him, where he was in prison, northern Pennsylvania. And they didn't know why, but I was able to figure out why later. Finally, in January 2003, I got in to see Michael. And it was at that time that I realized that Michael had developed from his sources in the Arab world extensive information about a forthcoming terrorist attack. He furnished this information to the FBI and Department of State. They ignored him. Finally, at the insistence of Michael's attorney, Lou Buffardi in Chicago, on March the 20th, 2001, FBI agent Keith Kutry came to the prison. And at that time, Michael told Keith Kutry, who was coordinating forthcoming terrorist attacks in the United States, had information on the movement of Soviet-made shoulder-fired missiles in the United States, was coordinating forthcoming skyjackings, was coordinating bombings and espionage, knew the identity of sleepers in the United States and overseas. By the way, the head terrorist was an electronic engineer out of Paterson, New Jersey. Michael also told FBI agent Keith Kutry on March the 20th, 2001 about an individual he had among the terrorists who was willing to cooperate with the United States government. And this particular individual was in charge of preparing false IDs for 4,500 terrorists around the world. He was a Christian, by the way. The FBI did not interview him until after 9/11, threatened him with prosecution, and deported him and his family to Egypt. He and his family have since been executed, according to Michael Reconasuto. Michael also had developed information through his sources that there were 37 Soviet-made missiles that were being handled through the Thabit Aviation in Quebec City, Canada, which had been smuggled into this country. There was a 30-hour window when our government, could have intercepted these 37 missiles. The FBI, even though they were advised of this, did nothing about it. These 37 missiles were brought into the United States out of Canada in 4 separate private airplanes. They're in the United States today, according to Michael's source. So, Michael thought he had done a job, like loyal American. Michael's just like I am, red, white, and blue, no question about it. He worked for the agency for 20 years until he realized how corrupt they were. And from then on, of course, he was on their list, no contact list. However, 9/11 occurred, and Michael was quite shocked and surprised. He thought maybe he had prevented this from occurring. FBI agent Keith Kuchar came back to Michael in the prison. He was in northern Pennsylvania in the federal penitentiary. Wanted to know why Michael was bothering the FBI and wasting its time. Accused Michael of seeking publicity, of being anti-FBI, anti-government. Called Michael a conspiracy theorist, a know-it-all, a hoaxer, and threatened him with prosecution. Michael, of course, immediately discontinued the interview and said he wouldn't talk to him any further without an attorney. I might mention also that Michael told me that as a result of his meeting with Tim Osman, who later ended up being Osama bin Laden, by the way, that our government furnished the Afghan terrorists $650 million a year for 5 years. They're using this money today against us. Now you're saying to me, well, yeah, anybody can say this, but where's the documentation? Well, on February the 5th, 2001, Michael wrote his attorney, one of his attorneys in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Don Bailey, a letter. And in this letter, I'm going to quote from it. Just a minute. I'm going to give it to you in a minute. Here's what he said to Bailey. He said, this is February the 5th, 2001. This is 6 months prior to 9/11. This is your documentation that Mike knew about this. And I've got the certified date stamp of the letter right here, and we're going to show you that. Put that up there. And in this letter, Michael tells former Congressman Bailey, you want to throw it on the certified date stamp? How we doing? There you go, right there. February 6th, 2001, Don Bailey, right? Pretty good documentation. Now, here's the letter. In the letter, it's a 4-page letter, Michael says, things have now come to a head. I now have contact with an operative that is in the Arab group known as the Base, that's Al-Qaeda. They are presently engaged in preparation for a major attack in the United States. We now have an insider to this group that handles false IDs and passports for the group's operation. I also have contact with one of the parties that supplies explosive materials to this group. As soon as we learned that an actual attack was in the works, we realized we can't fool around with this. On the other hand, we don't want to get screwed by the government. That's the understatement of the day. They'll screw you every chance they get, as far as I'm concerned. There's the letter he wrote to Don Bailey. You can throw this up on the screen real quick. I finally got in to see, Michael, the underlined part on page 2. You throw the date up there on page 1, and then the underline on page 2 and 3. So I couldn't figure out, I'm on Michael's defense team, why I could not get in to see Michael for over a year and a half. And I finally got in to see Michael on January the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. I spent 3 days with him. And it was at that time that I realized why. Because that was when he gave me the information that I just gave to you, that the FBI had been furnished advance information about 9/11 attacks. I then went from prison, Michael's prison in northern Pennsylvania to Washington, D.C. Yeah, there you go. That's right there. Okay, go to page 3 now. The last paragraph. There you go, the very bottom. Okay? So then what did I do? I went to Washington, D.C., and I put this report together. Dynamite report. I write good reports. You can be the greatest investigator in the world. If you don't know how to write a report, nobody's going to know how good you are. And I put this report together. And I personally contacted Lee Hamilton, co-chairman of the President's Commission to Investigate 9/11. Talked to him on the phone. I sent him my report. And here's the facts I sent to him. I don't know if you can read that or not. January 29, 2003. I spent 3 weeks in Washington, D.C. And I told him about Reconnaissance, gave him my report, as I said, and I haven't heard anybody contact me or Mike Reconnaissance since. We were not brought in to testify before the hearing committee. We were not in the 911 report. We were ignored. Thank goodness for the American Free Press, those folks back there. By the way, I've helped contribute a number of stories to the American Free Press. I'm listed as their Southwest Investigative Journalist, or whatever that title is, I'm not sure. And thank goodness for Willis Carto. I'm in Washington, D.C. for 3 weeks. If I had to pay for a hotel room and eat my meals there, can you imagine how much it would cost? No. American Free Press, Willis put me up in the American Free Press. I slept on these plastic post office boxes with the plywood and a mattress on top for 3 weeks, and I passed out my report to over 150 congressmen and senators. I also passed out my report, gave my report to the FBI, the Bureau, BATF, Secret Service, Los Angeles Police Department, National Terrorism Hotline, the Federal Express, Fred Smith owner. I happen to know Fred Smith, by the way. I don't know, I gave it to everybody. U.S. congressmen, senators, and the list goes on and on and on. Scotland Yard, I even gave it to the London Times, and I gave it to the Three Sisters. You know who the Three Sisters are, don't you? Washington Post, New York Times, LA Times. I call them the Three Sisters, okay? Nothing came of it. So, you remember Colleen Raleigh, the FBI female agent in Minneapolis, who blew the whistle on tried to investigate this whole situation? You remember her? So I said to myself, well, if these folks won't print it, I'm going to contact the Associated Press reporter that interviewed her, who interviewed her. And I contacted him, and I gave him my report on 911, and nothing came of it. I called him back 10 days later. I said, are you going to print the information from my report? If I get it to the Associated Press, it'll go all over the country. He says, no, we're not. I said, why not? He said, it's too hot. It's too hot. I also gave a copy of my report to President Bush. That's my cell phone. I'll turn it off.
That's President Bush calling.
That's President Bush calling. Yes, President. No, we're not panning you at all. Everything is beautiful here. We're just telling it like it is. And the way I gave it to the president, I think I have a little bit of imagination. So I had another matter that I was involved in, and I put that matter on top of my report. This had to do with harassing Americans and the microchips and the microwaves and the cyber terrorism and all. I had a little report on that I put together. And I put that on top of my 911 report. and I sent it to the White House. And believe it or not, of course, if I'd sent my terrorism report alone, I'm sure I would not have received an acknowledgement. But whoever received this report, these two reports at the White House, looked at the top report and didn't pay any attention to the second report, obviously, because here I have with me an acknowledgement of having received this report from the White House. And it's dated May the 30th, 2003. Okay? And in there he says, on behalf of President Bush, so on and so forth, we're going to look into this matter and refer it to the proper agency. I'm still waiting. Still waiting. So now we have, how much time do I have left, by the way?
About 15.
15 minutes.
Thank you for asking. Thank you.
Okay. I have some other information. By the way, I have a detailed 222-page report on Oklahoma City. What I do, I have a nice retirement, and I use my retirement money to expose the people that give me the money. Okay? And very frankly, it doesn't go very far because I spent about $8,000 on my trip to Washington on the 911. I spent another $5,000 or $6,000 on 2 trips to Oklahoma City, and so on and so forth. On Oklahoma City, I'll tell you real briefly because I only have 15 minutes. When Oklahoma City occurred, I had a call from Mike Reconasuto again. Mike's a very close friend of mine, as you can tell. A lot of respect for him. And Michael said that was not a fertilizer bomb, that was an ammonia nitrate, had the signature of ammonia nitrate, not ammonia nitrate, but of an electrohydrodynamic gaseous fuel device. This bomb, this electrohydrodynamic gaseous fuel device, is actually called a barometric bomb, was developed by the Hercules Manufacturing. Michael was the one who designed it. It was produced by Dyna Nobel out of Salt Lake City, and it was highly classified. And Michael said that that bomb in the car at Oklahoma City had the signature of his barometric bomb. Long story short, I obtained the contract number of this particular bomb. You want to put this? Here you go. From a science magazine, bottom of the page. The very bottom of the page, you can see the contract number of this bomb. It was given to Dyna Nobel on a contract for $2,600,000. I wrote to the Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey and told them I wanted the copy of the contract, and I gave them the contract number. And they wrote back and said there's no such contract here. That's my letter to that's the Army back from the Picatinny Arsenal. I also wrote to Dyna Nobel, who manufactured the bomb, and I never received a response. In September of 1995, the editor of Firehouse Magazine wrote an article about Oklahoma City, and in this article, he did a timeline, and there were 4 conventional bombs that were taken out of Oklahoma City. It's underlined. There are 4 conventional bombs. I have among my videos and DVDs, I have the TV announcements from Oklahoma City that afternoon. It's Gunderson Chronicles number 3, by the way, if you're interested in it, of various TV stations in Oklahoma City announcing that they were taking out unexploded bombs of the building. Yeah, there you go. There's a timeline right there. 1, 2, 3, 4. And one of the announcers on TV made the statement We're going to find out where these bombs came from now, because one of them has U.S. Army stenciled on it. I have this. Now, much to my surprise, on June the 12th, 1995, President Clinton gave a speech at Hanover, New Hampshire. And in this speech, he made the statement that the bomb in Oklahoma City was a miracle of technology. An ammonium nitrate bomb that explodes little tree trunks in the backyard of the farmer is a miracle of technology. This was in the Spotlight American Free Press, and if you folks don't take the American Free Press, you have to take it. It's the one newspaper that tells it like it is. I'm very proud to be involved with those people, very proud of it. Now, the latest information in Oklahoma City, Terry Nichols, co-conspirator with McVeigh, has submitted a 19-page affidavit in Salt Lake City to the federal court that McVeigh told him he was taking orders from a fellow named Larry Potts, number 2 man in the FBI. That's the latest information. Did you see this in the mainstream media? No, of course not. This affidavit is a 19-page affidavit submitted February the 25th, 2007, a little over a year ago. So, there we have. No question about it. Oh, by the way, speaking of the terrorist movement today, Kurt Weldon, former congressman of Pennsylvania, who was defeated in the last election, wrote a book called Countdown to Terror. And among his sources, he said there are 10 cities that have been targeted for bombs. And these are Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Valdez, Alaska, because of the oil, Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Miami, Chicago, and Houston. So what's this all about? Well, I think you folks are pretty well educated. You know what this is about. This terrorist movement is all about Illuminati. It's about passing the Patriot Act. It's about establishing FEMA. By the way, the Patriot Act was written by George Bush Sr.'s Department of Justice officials under George Bush Sr.'s administration when he was in office umpteen years ago. A female author, one of the authors, publicly made the statement, before this passes, people will have to be killed. She was right. Oklahoma City, Twin Towers, people are killed. It was passed in no time at all. Most of the congressmen didn't even bother to read it. So that's what we have. So what's my reward been? Well, I've been kicked out of the Society of Former Special Agents of the FBI. Everybody that's in the FBI, they retire or quit, they get into the society. I've been kicked out because I've been publicly critical of the FBI and the government. I filed a Freedom of Information request 2005, still have not received any information on it. I ran for a political office in Las Vegas in 1996. My campaign manager, a fellow named Jim Kloberg, he stole from my campaign. I had documentation he stole from. I had his bank account. I had the post office box number he used, other than the box number that we used for raising money for the campaign. I gave it to the FBI, and I said, this man's committed an election fraud violation, and I have letters from me to them, to the U.S. Attorney, nothing. I find out later Jim Kloberg was an FBI informant. In the early 1980s, when I first came out of went public with my criticism of the government, started with the Jeffrey McDonald case. He's a former Green Beret doctor who was convicted of murdering his wife, 2 children, Fort Bragg, 1970, February 17, 1970. Did not commit the murders. I was asked to investigate the case after I got retired from the FBI. Within 10 months, on October 25, I obtained a signed confession from a girl named Alina Stokely, who said she was a member of a satanic cult group, and it was a satanic cult Manson-type murder, involved bringing drugs and plastic body cavities to dead GIs out of Southeast Asia into military bases. She said Generals were involved, enlisted personnel, police officers, 2 attorneys in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and the list goes on. Anyway, I went public with this information, and that's when the light bulb went on. That's when I realized what was happening, what was happening in this country today. So then, as in the early 1980s, I had 3 occasions when gunmen were waiting for me. I had 3 investigations by the FBI of me. I had a tip that they were going to investigate me, and they were investigating me. I was going to be indicted on a Tuesday. I took 3 polygraph tests the previous week because Bill Alexander was the U.S. attorney, and I had my contacts there. By the way, investigators live on their informants. They develop information about what's going to happen in advance if they can. And I took 3 polygraph tests, passed them, gave them to my attorney, Doug Millar. Not Doug Millar, sorry, Doug. Doug Mulder. Out of Dallas, Texas. He gave them to the former of the grand jury and to the U.S. attorney. Nothing happened. But if I'd been indicted, you can imagine the thousands of dollars I would have had to spend. Anyway, I was able to get through that. The next thing, that didn't happen, so the FBI had a girl named Pam Fawcett. They tried to set me up on a drug deal. She came to me after 6 months of dealing with her. She kept trying to say, you did this, you did that, on the telephone. I knew it was being tapped. I didn't know it was being tapped, but I realized later it was. And she came to me and she told me the whole story. I took a signed statement from her. I said, Pam, why are you telling me this now? She said, I woke up the other morning and I realized you're the only honest son of a bitch I've talked to in 6 months. Those were her exact words. I said, Pam, you shouldn't cuss like that. Anyway, she had the run of the Modesto, California office. She had her own coffee cup. They'd given her $2,000. They did everything they could to put my butt in jail. Didn't work. Next thing that happened to me, listen, it's divine intervention. It's divine intervention. I actually had gunmen waiting for me 3 times. I can prove it. I had witnesses. And after the fact, I made phone calls and I found out that was true. And then the next thing that happened to me is, and right now on the internet, I understand somebody told me there's 183,000 references to me on the internet. 98% are favorable, 2% are unfavorable. And those are the ones that are put on there by the FBI, government, informants, disinformation specialists, like I mentioned earlier in this lecture. The latest thing that happened to me is I was living in Las Vegas. I realized I wasn't normal, I wasn't right. I'd sit at my desk, I couldn't think. I went down and took blood tests. Being an investigator, you're always going to be paranoid. To be paranoid is healthy. To be more paranoid is healthier, okay? And I went down and took blood tests, and I had arsenic cyanide in me, and then I did some research, and I found out that the government has a gas that will increase your blood pressure so that you will have a stroke or heart attack. My blood pressure was 242 over 119. The wonder I didn't die. But I caught on, okay? And within 2 weeks, I left. I called John DeCamp, my buddy in Lincoln, in Omaha, Nebraska. Lincoln and in Claytonia. He lived in Claytonia, Nebraska. I called John and I said, John, I got to get out of here. He said, well, come on back. And he rented me a place, one of his houses. And within 2 weeks, I left Las Vegas. And I moved to Claytonia, Nebraska, a town of 296 people. And you know these people have been hanging around there, but it's kind of a funny story because Claytonia, Nebraska is 296 people. The whole main street is 5 blocks long. There's a bar, a bank, and a post office on the main street. And if you get off the street, everything dead ends into a cornfield. And we've had surveillances. My associate, Clarence Malcolm, and I, he's back there with me, we picked up surveillances on us, and we get in the car and we start chasing these people, and they start running up these side streets, and we end up going up into a dead-end cornfield. So they have to turn around and come back, and we get pictures of them. I carry a camera with me in the car all the time, by the way. I've had the LAPD. I had a case against them, and that's a long story. I don't have time to go into it. I only have about 5 or 10 more minutes. 3 minutes. Well, I don't know about the next speaker.
No,
Huh? Well, I'll tell you. Okay, I'll tell you about the LAPD. I had a threatening phone call. This was October of 2003, and the caller was it was garbled. It was satanic chanting, is what it is. And then they mentioned my daughter's name, and then more satanic chanting. And then about that same time, 10:15, October 15th, as a matter of fact, 2003, I had my window shot out. I was standing by my window, it was shot out. So I said to myself, you know, I think I got a problem here. And I went down to the LAPD. I make it a point of every time they do something to me, I go on the record with whatever agency has jurisdiction, the local agency. In fact, I was in to see the Las Vegas Police Department so often with the incidents, surveillances and entries into my apartment and the poison and all that sort of thing, that one of the sergeants finally came out and said, if you report any more of these incidents to us, we're going to escort you out of here. And I said, well, if you escort me out of here, I'm going to the police, I'm going to the news media, and I'm going to the sheriff personally. Can you imagine FBI chief escorted out of the Las Vegas Police Department? That would make pretty good headlines. And anyway, so I made it a point of going down to see Detective Pat Barron, Wilcox Division, Los Angeles Police Department. And I played this recording for him. He says, you're right, that is a threat. He says, we're going to put a trap on your line. Now, a trap, ladies and gentlemen, is when they lock anybody that calls my number, it locks into that number and I know what number they're calling from. So I got a call back at my apartment in Los Angeles where I was staying. I didn't live there. I was staying at my daughter's apartment. And I had a call, this is so-and-so LAPD, we want to let you know we're putting a trap on the line. I'm saying to myself, what if I have a tap on the line? They're going to know about it, you know, which I didn't think was too bright. But, so here comes Paymon. I got to get off the podium. Okay, Paymon. I'm okay. Okay. So I make a complaint with Pat Barron. He says, yeah, that's a complaint. Okay. So I'm saying, hallelujah, now I'm going to find out who's making these threatening phone calls and these anonymous phone calls for 28 years. This is how long I've been involved in these issues. And I go back to Las Vegas and I call Pat Barron. I said, Ted Gunderson. He says, Ted who? I says, Gunderson? Gunderson who? Didn't know me, right? But yeah, you're going to put a trap on my line in Los Angeles. We didn't put a trap on your line. Long story short, I have another case I'm working, and I use that other case as an excuse to subpoena LAPD files. Well, before I'd subpoenaed the files, I filed a complaint with Internal Affairs, the LAPD, and they write back to me and give me, acknowledge the fact that I filed a complaint with them. They gave me the file number of the Internal Affairs investigation, so on and so forth. And I even, in my subpoena, give them the file number of the Internal Affairs investigation. And they write back, then, when I fish the subpoena, there's no record of you in among the LAPD files. Okay, I'll wrap up just a minute now, Paymon. Poison, LAPD, 1986, had a telephone tap on my line. I discovered I sued GTE. I got an out-of-court settlement. My lug nuts have been loosened on my car. My right front wheel came off doing 75 miles an hour. I've had flat tires. Windows have been shot out twice. Truck's been stolen. My business has been sabotaged, cyber terrorism. These people have come into my house. It's like Grand Central Station. I've been there at night. They can get past any lock. I had cyber terrorism, poison. I've had people planted on me, threatening phone calls, hidden cameras. I have a hidden camera in my living room right now. I was looking through the files here a couple months ago, and I couldn't find a file at the table. And the phone rang at 8:27 that morning. And a male voice says, did you find the file? So I have a hidden camera in my house. I had gang stalking, TV surveillance, threatening letters, and so on and so forth. So I've had a bit of a roller coaster ride for the last 28 years. It's been fun because I do enjoy kicking butt, to be honest with you. I'm very competitive, and I do tell it like it is, whether they like it or not. So that's basically my story about terrorism. And before I go, I'd like to mention that among my ventures, that I give away free DVDs, shipping and handling only, and they are available. For example, I charge $3.83, and I have over 400 DVDs that I give away. I also have a contact who claims he can stop foreclosures, and I'll be glad to give you anybody whose home is being foreclosed on now. I'll be glad to give you that phone number. The bottom line is that there is a covert criminal enterprise, rogue enterprise operating in the country today. There's two elements in the government, covert, overt. I was the overt, the guy that went to the bank robbery scene. What did the suspect look like in interviewing witnesses and so on and so forth. The covert are the people that are being recruited out of special forces. McVeigh was one, for example. He was recruited by the CIA out of special forces. The government says he flunked out of special forces. He did not. He wrote a letter to his sister, told her he'd been recruited by the CIA to work on their drug operation and on their assassination squad.
What's your website for the CD people?
For the CD people, it's the 1-FREE-DVD.com. 1-FREE-DVD.com. And well, TedGunderson.com. My TedGunderson.com site is closed down right now, I'm sorry to say. But I'm working on getting it back up. I don't know if it's been sabotaged or not. It's a common thing with me. My latest lecture, it's a good one. It's called Infiltration of American Intelligence Agencies and Law Enforcement by the Illuminati. They is the Illuminati. It is the satanic movement. A book that you must buy and read. You can order this. I don't have them with me. Is The Franklin Cover-Up by John DeCamp. They were taking children out of Omaha, flying them to D.C. for sex orgies with congressmen, senators, and what do you think they do after that? They tell the congressman, senator how to vote. The story that tells it all. I was giving a lecture in Las Vegas several years ago. A fellow walked up to me afterwards, handed me this book, says, this is what it's all about. This is about the Illuminati. It sets forth their 25 goals, which includes control of the press, corrupt the youth through sex and drugs.
Name the title.
Pawns in the Game. Pawns in the Game, Franklin Cover-Up, free DVDs. I feel like Santa Claus. One more thing. One more thing. This is very, very important. Here on March the 16th, just a couple of days ago, for the fourth time in 176 years that Congress has been operating, for the fourth time only, they had a closed-door session. And the word was leaked out. And supposedly the session was about new surveillance provisions. Well, don't kid yourself. We're being watched closely. There's probably half a dozen informants in this group. By the way, those of you who are informants, if you come back and give me your date of birth, social security number, I'll give you any product that I have that's available to you. Okay. And these are the topics they dealt with. The imminent collapse of the U.S. economy to occur by September 2008. Imminent collapse of U.S. federal government finances by February 2009. Possibility of civil war inside the United States as a result of the collapse. Advanced roundup of insurgent U.S. citizens likely to move against the government. Detention of those roundups at Rex 84 camps, constructions throughout the United States. There are concentration camps that have been constructed throughout the country. Underground tunnels too, by the way. Possibility of retaliation against members of the Congress for the collapse. Boo-hoo. Right. Location of the safe facilities for congressmen and their families to reside during expected massive civil unrest. The necessary and unavoidable merger of the United States and Canada for its natural resources and Mexico for its cheap labor. The issuance of new currency, Amero, for all three nations, and so on and so forth. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for listening to my...
Mine?
Yeah, let me borrow, will
No.
you? I have to take the blame for the delay because I'm a last-minute speaker, to be honest with you. I wasn't scheduled to be here. I just happened to be in Southern California. And Paymon had some cancellations, and I told him I'd be more than happy to speak. And then we've been trying to get some material up on the board here, and that's what we're finagling with here, Dennis and my buddies.